This is the last contender of the Alden Alternative series that we're doing through this Q4. It's supposed to be all through October, but every year October ends up spilling into like January. But this is the last one for the Alden Alternatives, and it's the Rhodes Owen mock toe boot that looks from the outside to be a leather full, high quality, durable version of an Alden boot that even has a little bit luggy outsole on the bottom. But we don't really know how it stacks up to the Alden, so we're gonna cut this thing in half, run it through our test to see if this boot is the Alden killer. How high quality is it? Are all these materials on the outside actually reflect what's on the inside of the boot? And is this a decent boot for the price? And thanks to Huckberry for sponsoring this video, because if you don't know who Huckberry is, they're really well known for doing a really good job of curating not just high quality goods and when it comes to like clothing, pants, shoes, boots, but they really fixate on doing the type of goods that aren't just cheap stuff that wears out in a few months, but it's also not the ultra high-end stuff that's like $800 and nobody can afford it. They found this really sweet spot in the market by offering white labeled brands, by offering strategic partnerships with other brands. What it ends up making is a one-stop shop for high quality men's good if you're into this style of stuff. But there's a lot of guys out there that are struggling to find their style and pieces of clothing that match the boots that they're wanting to wear. And Huckberry offers all of that, plus like tons of other stuff. Like anything that you can imagine that there's a cheap version on Amazon that it breaks in a week, Huckberry has a high quality version of all that kind of stuff. And one thing that I really like that Huckberry does that we've somewhat emulated with our collaborations and our brand is they work with a lot of these independent brands, these emerging brands from around the world to bring you really unique boots and shoes that are exclusive to them in smaller batches while still maintaining a pretty fair price compared to the rest of the market. So thanks to Huckberry for sponsoring this video, and be sure to check out their Cyber Week sale where you can get 40% up to 40% off. So I'll put links in the description. So what is this boot? Well, the brand is Rhodes, which is an in-house brand for Huckberry. The style is the Owen mock toe boot. They weigh just over 2 pounds. They retail for $298. They're made in Mexico. And the way that Rhodes positions this product is a pair of boots you can depend on for a lifetime of service. The Owen boot, designed for lasting comfort, are stylish boots made in a family-run factory in León, the boot-making capital of Mexico. So now start looking at the materials of this boot, starting with the leather first, because from the outside, this looks like it's a suede leather, but it could easily be what they call a rough out leather or a flesh out leather, where they take typical leather and reverse it so that you get that fine, smooth grain pattern that holds all these loose fibers together, flip to the inside, compared to just a suede that's cut from a lower cross section that doesn't have that structural grain pattern. Well, to see which version of the leather cross section it is, we cut a little slit in the leather and put the macro lens on it, and I don't see much of a grain. It looks like it might be just under the grain. I don't think it's a really cheap suede, but it's not a nubuck and it's not a rough out leather. So I would say it's lower in the cross section. But you can see that they have strengthened this by adding a fabric backer on the side, and it's lined with leather. As for the thickness, it's 1.8 to 2 millimeters thick, so right on par what you'd expect for more of a dress boot. It's pretty common to see a suede leather on a more dressy boot in this price range. I wish it was a more flesh out or a nubuck leather, but it doesn't have that same grain pattern and structure that gives more grain leathers its rigidity and its shape. And then if we look at the inside, this lining leather is 1 millimeter thick, has a pretty heavy, not plastic coating, but a pigment on top, where instead of laying a literal plastic layer on top, it's just a heavy layer of what's essentially paint, which doesn't really hurt the breathability of the leather nearly as much as plastic, but you don't get quite that fully natural look, which for dress boots, some people don't like, some people like. For me, I like the more natural leather, but it is a lining leather, and don't ever put crazy amount of emphasis into that unless it's really, really bad. And this is right on par with this price range. Then if we look further into the inside of the boot to see how this boot is structured, I already ripped out the insole to compare it to that world famous Alden Last, the True Balance Last, that seems to be replicated by a lot of these brands that are making this boot, because if you line up this insole, they're almost identical. The Rhodes is actually just a little bit wider on the ball of the foot, but none of them have had this little bump off the side, which I'm still not really sure what that does. I don't know if it just makes a little bit of extra room for your heel or your ankle. But now that I have this pulled out, you can see that it's the same lining leather with a little bit of fabric underneath, and it was glued down to a layer of blue pour-on foam that you can see has a structural stitch holding it onto what I'm assuming is the layers underneath. But then if we look at the components that we know are pretty high quality, like the midsole, you can see it's a full grain and full length leather midsole, I think. We'll see if we get it cut in half for sure. but the way it's structured and the way it's sewn together leads me to believe it's a real full leather midsole. It also has a full grain, holy cow, so much full leather. It also has a 360 Goodyear welt. It also has a leather welt, has a leather heel stack. So for 300 bucks, once again, pretty on par with what we've seen. I was hoping for 300 bucks you get a leather insole, and maybe there still is one underneath that blue foam, but I think I'm willing to bet it's just composite or synthetic materials. Let's cut this thing in half and see how it stacks up to the rest of the Alden alternative competition. All right, we got it cut in half, and if you're not subscribed, consider doing it. It's a free little click that helps us out more than pretty much anything else you can do. And if you are subscribed, thank you for subscribing. It's what allows us to cut these boots apart and shoes twice a week, every single week. So let's see what's inside. So my hopes and dreams that it was a leather insole are dashed, unfortunately. But it's built about like the rest of the boots, $300 and under, because you have, like we mentioned, that leather on top of the foam, and then you have compressed cardboard, a steel shank, a little bit more of that pink cardboard underneath. The lasting board seems to be like a little bit closer, almost a sneaker lasting board. Got a cork filling on the inside. There seems to be like 2 or 3 different qualities of this like blue speckly counter material. There's really cheap, fragile stuff that you can just break with your hand. There's some that's really thin that like Thursday uses that is heat activated and it shapes to your foot a little bit more. And then there's some that are really thick. And this one's right in between like a Thursday and the really thick ones, because it's not nearly as thin, but it's not really fragile at all. Because sometimes you see this blue filler and you can just bend it like this and it cracks and breaks. And when you can do that with your hand, imagine this is on the inside of your boot, and one time you press down on this heel, you accidentally step on it, you're prying it off with your foot, you can crack that counter. But fortunately, this is one of the more stable and flexible kinds of this blue counter material. You know, it's that constant balance of the more the price goes up, the more leather you get, but the more leather you get, the more the harder it is to break in, and the less initial comfort. The lower the price, the more synthetics, but the more comfortable you can make it, and the more initial comfort. And so usually from this $200 to $350 price range, we see this shell game of like, where are we putting the leather, where are we prioritizing the comfort? I think that's why I really like this price range of boots. So through and through, now that we have it cut in half, is this worth the price? For 300 bucks, it seems to be right on par with the rest. You know, I think there's some boots you can get for $250 that have similar components. But to really see that full length leather insole, it'd have to be probably around $350 to begin with anyway. So I think it's right in the right ballpark. And how does this rank compared to the Alden alternative board that we've done this year, being that it's the very last one? Well, I would put this at the number 3 spot. So just above the J. Crew boot, but just underneath of the Alden boot. And thanks again to Huckberry for sponsoring this video. I'll put links to not just these boots, but some of the other stuff that I really like from their site in the description. And thank you guys for everything you do. See ya.